My name is Apollo Rook. 1 month ago, I was a railroad blacksmith outside Pittsburgh when the world froze over. The military abandoned us. Neighbors died in their beds. Power grids failed as temperatures hit -50. I kept 7 people alive with nothing but my forge, my tools, and skills from a dying trade. This is how we survived the first month of the Ice Age apocalypse. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Apollo Rook. I was 42 years old when the world changed, though some days I feel twice that now. Before all this, I worked the Pittsburgh to Chicago line for Amtrak for nearly 15 years. Most people only saw me as the man driving their train, but my real passion was always in my workshop. I was a blacksmith in my off hours, restoring antique tools and creating historical replicas. People thought it was strange, a railroad engineer obsessed with old-world crafts. They called it my hipster hobby. Now they call it salvation. I remember the date everything started to shift. It was early November, still autumn by the calendar, but winter had already sent its first whispers. I was making my usual run, and I noticed something odd along the tracks near the Ohio border. Animals moving south in numbers I'd never seen. Deer mostly, but also smaller creatures, all flowing like a river of fur and desperation. I radioed it in as a precaution, potential track hazards. The dispatcher just laughed, said something about early migration. By my next shift 3 days later, the weather reports started using terms like anomalous polar vortex disruption and unprecedented Arctic oscillation. The meteorologist kept assuring everyone it was temporary, just a blip in the climate pattern. I knew better. You spend enough time watching the land from a train window, you develop a sense for when nature is trying to tell you something. I'd seen the animals. They knew what was coming. I started stocking up. Nothing dramatic, just extra propane, canned goods, firewood for my home outside Pittsburgh. The other engineers teased me during shift changes, called me a doomsday prepper. I didn't argue, just kept preparing. My blacksmithing workshop was detached from my house, an old barn I'd converted years ago. Good stone foundation, thick walls, and most importantly, a coal-fired forge that could generate serious heat. Never thought that forge would end up saving more lives than I could count. The temperatures dropped 20 degrees overnight the first time. People panicked but recovered. Then came the big one 3 days later. 40-degree plunge in less than 12 hours. The power grid wasn't built for that kind of strain. Transformers exploded across 3 states. I watched from my porch as the lights of Pittsburgh flickered and died section by section, like stars being blown out. I fired up the forge that night, moved my mattress into the workshop, and settled in. The temperature hit -15 by midnight. I kept the radio on, listening to the emergency broadcasts. Evacuation orders for the city. Traffic jams on every southbound highway. People abandoning their cars when they ran out of gas, trying to walk to safety in temperatures that would kill them in hours. By morning, it was -25. I walked to my nearest neighbor's house, the Williams family. Found them huddled under blankets, using their gas stove for heat. The father, Mark, had frostbite on his fingers already. Their 2 kids were terrified. I convinced them to come to my workshop. The forge was running hot, keeping the temperature inside almost comfortable. I kept all the newspapers from before. Sometimes I read them to remember how blind we were to what was coming. Scientists warning about climate tipping points, polar ice destabilization, methane releases. All buried on page 12, while celebrity gossip made the front page. Now those celebrities are probably frozen in their mansions, and the scientists nobody listened to are either dead or wishing they were. By the end of that first week, I had 4 families in my workshop. 17 people total, including 5 children. The place wasn't designed for that many, but it was the only building in our area with reliable heat. I set up a rotation for the forge, taught others how to maintain it safely. Carbon monoxide was as much a killer as the cold in those early days. People firing up grills indoors, running car engines in closed garages for heat. We found the Peterson couple that way, 2 doors down. Holding each other in their bed, windows sealed with plastic sheeting, portable generator running in their bedroom. Dead from fumes before the cold could take them. Food became the next concern. Everyone had brought what they could carry, but 17 people go through supplies quickly. We organized scavenging parties to nearby houses, taking only from the abandoned. Once, there were ethical lines nobody wanted to cross, not yet anyway. The grocery store 5 miles away had been picked clean already. Fights had broken out there, I heard. Blood frozen on the linoleum floors. I converted my truck to run on alternates when gasoline became impossible to find. Railroad engineers know ways to make engines run on just about anything combustible. We drove out to farms, looking for preserved foods in root cellars, livestock that hadn't frozen or been taken yet. The cattle were mostly dead, grotesque statues in the fields, but we found chickens in insulated coops, a few pigs that had burrowed into haystacks. Someone suggested we head south, like everyone else. I showed them the traffic helicopter footage from the last TV broadcast. Miles of abandoned vehicles on I-70 and I-76. Thousands of people who thought they could outrun winter. Their cars became their coffins when the fuel ran out. No, we were better staying put with a heat source we could control. The exodus south was a death march for most who attempted it. On day 9, we saw the military convoy. 3 Humvees and a transport truck coming down our rural road, stopping at each house. They reached our workshop around noon. 2 soldiers, a sergeant, and a lieutenant came inside while the others secured the perimeter. They seemed surprised to find so many people alive. The lieutenant, a woman named Chen, explained what they knew. This wasn't just a freak weather event. Multiple climate systems had collapsed simultaneously. The Gulf Stream had effectively stopped, triggering a chain reaction. Volcanic eruptions in Iceland had pumped ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. And something about methane releases from the ocean floor that accelerated everything. The models had predicted we might have decades before something like this. We got weeks. They took our names, told us about resource collection points being established in southern Tennessee and Kentucky. Said they'd be back in a week with transportation for evacuation. The lieutenant kept looking at my forged setup. Now I understand why. She knew they weren't coming back. She was memorizing how I'd arrange things, how the heat was being generated and distributed. Knowledge that would keep her alive later. That was the last time I saw any government presence in our area. The promised evacuation never materialized. We heard rumors on the shortwave radio that the southern resource points had been overwhelmed, that the military had pulled back to protect strategic assets. I don't blame them. The scale of this thing was beyond any disaster plan they had. By the end of the second week, our group had developed systems. My blacksmithing skills became the centerpiece of our survival. I taught others how to work the forge, how to repair tools, how to shape metal for needed items. We melted down anything non-essential to create wood-burning stoves for the surrounding houses, allowing us to expand our living quarters. I showed them how to make snowshoes from scrap aluminum and wire. How to create hunting spears and skinning knives. Sarah Williams, who'd been an ER nurse, established our medical corner. Mike Chen, no relation to the lieutenant, had been a plumber and knew water systems. He figured out how to keep pipes from freezing, how to safely melt snow for drinking water. Darius Washington had hunted all his life and took charge of food acquisition. Each person found their role. The temperature continued to drop. -30 became normal. -40 happened twice that second week. We insulated the workshop as best we could, hanging blankets as interior walls, stuffing clothing into every crack. The forge burned day and night, consuming our coal supplies faster than I'd calculated. I started experimenting with alternative fuels. Wood works, but not hot enough for some metalwork. We found ways to compress paper, cardboard, certain plastics into burnable bricks that supplemented the coal. We had to venture further each time for supplies, which meant crossing territories that weren't ours anymore. The world had become tribal quickly. Streets and landmarks familiar for decades suddenly felt foreign. The Westfield Mall 3 miles away had become a fortress for another group we discovered. They'd seen our smoke and knew someone else had heat. They sent scouts. We saw them watching from the tree line one evening. I established guard ships after that. We had few real weapons, mostly hunting rifles and shotguns from the surrounding farms. I forged spears, machetes, and shields from road signs. Medieval solutions for a world that had regressed centuries in just weeks. The temperature during the days stabilized around -20, which started to feel almost bearable. But the nights would plunge to -50 or worse. Wind chill made it impossible to be outside for more than minutes without proper gear. We created a buddy system. No one goes outside alone. Check for frostbite every 15 minutes. Watch for the confusion that precedes hypothermia. We lost Elijah Smith that way. 70-year-old former high school principal who went out to check his home without telling anyone. Found him halfway back, sitting against a tree like he'd stopped to rest, his eyes open and frosted over. We couldn't even bury him. The ground was like concrete. We placed his body in his garage, covered with a sheet. There would be proper burials when spring came. If spring ever came again. The children adapted better than the adults in some ways. They treated it like an adventure at first, all of them sleeping in the loft space above my workshop, telling stories by lantern light. But they understood the danger too. 10-year-old Sophie Lewis was the one who spotted the wolves first. The temperature had dropped to -40 that night when we heard the howling start. But these weren't ordinary wolves. They were bigger, more desperate, and hunting in larger packs than I'd ever heard of. The extreme conditions had pushed them to change their behaviors, to cooperate in ways that made them far more dangerous. The animals knew something we were still learning. In this new world, you adapted quickly or you died. When we first spotted the wolves through the workshop windows, I realized how quickly nature reclaims what was once hers. They moved like shadows against the snow, at least 7 of them, circling our building with predatory precision. Their ribs visible even from a distance, desperation driving them into our territory. We doused the exterior lights immediately. Darkness became our ally. I had been reluctant to take in neighbors at first. Our workshop wasn't designed for habitation, certainly not for 17 people. But watching those wolves hunting in coordinated patterns, I understood something fundamental about survival. Alone, we were prey. Together, we at least had a chance. The first family that sought shelter with me, the Williams, brought that nurse, Sarah. Her medical knowledge had already saved 2 people from severe frostbite. The Chen family came next, Mike's plumbing skills proving invaluable for our water system. The Washingtons arrived with hunting rifles, and Darius's lifetime of experience tracking game. The Lewis family brought little except their terrified children, but Sophie's sharp eyes had spotted those wolves before anyone else. Even now, she was posted at the north window, watching their movements with a calmness that belied her age. "They're testing us," she whispered that night, her breath fogging the glass. Seeing if we're weak. The child was right. We weren't the only ones adapting to this new world. The wolves had already figured out that humans were no longer the dominant species. We were potential food now, especially the weak or unprepared. We established strict rules after that night. No one leaves the compound alone. No unnecessary noise. No lights visible from outside after dark. Resources rationed carefully, with transparent accounting. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Children included in age-appropriate tasks to maintain morale. Disputes resolved by council vote. Simple, clear guidelines that kept us functioning as a unit rather than 17 scared individuals. The council was my idea, though I never wanted to be on it. 5 adults rotating on 3-day shifts, no single leader. The military taught me that rigid hierarchies work until they don't, and when they fail catastrophically. Better to distribute authority, build resilience through redundancy. I served when required but preferred working the forge, teaching others the skills that kept us warm and equipped. The wolves retreated with the dawn, but their message lingered. Our world had contracted to the immediate surroundings of my workshop, and even that wasn't truly secure. We needed better defenses, more supplies, and information about what was happening beyond our isolated pocket. Our first real break came 3 days after the wolf encounter. The military convoy I mentioned earlier approached from the east, moving slowly along the snowpacked road. 3 Humvees and a transport truck, their engines rumble-carrying for miles in the still frozen air. We doused the forge, minimizing our smoke signature until we knew their intentions. Recent encounters with other survivors had made us cautious. They stopped 50 yards from our perimeter. 6 soldiers deployed in standard formation while 2 officers approached our main entrance. Their breath clouded around their balaclavas as they waited for us to respond. I went out with Darius Washington as backup, his hunting rifle casually visible and not threatening. Lieutenant Tamara Chen, the female officer, introduced herself, lowering her hood. 7th Infantry, Emergency Response Division. We're conducting welfare checks and cataloging survivor clusters. They seemed genuinely surprised to find 17 people alive and relatively healthy nearly 2 weeks into the freeze. Most isolated groups, they told us, had already succumbed to cold, hunger, or conflict. Our forge-centered compound was an anomaly. Lieutenant Chen requested a tour of our setup. I showed her the workshop, the modified housing units we'd established in nearby buildings, our water collection system, and food storage. She took notes, occasionally murmuring into her radio. The way she studied my forge setup was particularly intense. Now I understand why. She knew they weren't coming back. She was gathering survival intel. "We're establishing resource collection points in Kentucky and Tennessee," she explained. "The northern states are being temporarily ceded to the elements. Strategic withdrawal. We'll return within 7 days with transportation for evacuation. And if we prefer to stay? Darius asked. The lieutenant's expression was answer enough. This wasn't a suggestion. The temperature will continue to drop, she said flatly. Models predict -70 within 30 days. Without industrial-scale heating, northern settlements will not survive February. They left us with some supplies: extra diesel fuel, medical kits, emergency rations. Not enough to change our situation significantly, but a gesture of official concern. As they departed, the surgeon handed me a shortwave radio frequency. For updates, he said, but don't count on it working much longer. Satellites are failing, relay stations going offline. Too cold for electronics. We never heard from them again. The radio frequency broadcast static for 2 days, then automated messages about evacuation routes for another 3, then nothing. We learned later that most evacuation convoys never reached their destinations. Roads became impassable, fuel supplies critical. The strategic withdrawal became a rout. I kept working the forge, training others to maintain it when I needed rest. We expanded our operations, creating tools for the new reality. Long metal poles with hooks for retrieving items from frozen buildings without entering. Crampons that attached to boots for safer movement on ice. Snow shovels, cooking pots, makeshift stoves for the auxiliary buildings. The metalwork kept us busy, purposeful. It wasn't just about the items produced, but the activity itself, the sense of creating rather than merely consuming. Sarah Williams organized our medical supplies, creating detailed inventory and establishing protocols for different emergencies. Mike Chen modified the plumbing in surrounding houses to create a network of insulated water pipes, allowing us to expand our living quarters while maintaining access to melted snow water. Darius Washington trained hunting parties, teaching suburban residents who'd never held a rifle how to track and harvest the few animals still active in the Arctic conditions. We began to feel almost hopeful, like we might actually survive this. Then came the first attack. Not from wolves or cold, but other people. It happened during early evening, just as darkness was settling. 2 men appeared at our perimeter fence, calling for help. They looked half-frozen, disoriented. Classic distress signals that triggered our humanitarian instincts. Sarah was already preparing medical supplies when I noticed something odd about their positioning. They were drawing attention to the front entrance while keeping our perimeter guards occupied. I ran to the back of the compound just in time to catch 3 more people scaling the fence near our food storage. They hadn't expected resistance there. My presence startled them, giving me the advantage. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I did what was necessary to protect our people. 2 fled immediately. The 3rd pulled a knife. The hunting spear I'd forged the previous week kept him at distance long enough for Darius to arrive with his rifle. We subdued him without serious violence, though he fought desperately until the cold sapped his strength. The 2 distressed men at the front disappeared when they realized their diversion had failed. We brought their companion inside, treated his hypothermia, and questioned him once he was stable. His name was Tyler. He and his group had been watching our compound for days, noting our routines, planning the raid. "You have heat," he said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. They've been surviving in the abandoned Westfield Mall 3 miles away. 43 people initially, down to 26 now from cold, illness, and internal conflict. They'd been burning furniture, clothing, books, anything flammable. It wasn't enough. They were freezing to death incrementally, losing fingers and toes to frostbite, watching children grow weaker each day. We kept Tyler overnight, fed him, then made a decision that would alter our community's direction. Instead of treating him as a prisoner or ejecting him back into the lethal cold, we sent him back with an offer, not charity, but alliance. We had heat and metalworking capabilities. They had numbers and access to the mall's resources. Together, we might create something more sustainable than either group alone. Tyler left with one of the wood-burning stoves I'd created, a demonstration of good faith. I wasn't naive. I posted additional guards and prepared for betrayal. But 3 days later, a delegation from the mall arrived. Not raiders this time, but representatives including a former store manager named Rebecca Hayes, who had emerged as their leader. The negotiations were tense but productive. We would create a heating system for their central gathering space in the mall's food court. They would share their remaining food supplies and provide additional security for scavenging missions. Neither group would absorb the other, maintaining separate identities but coordinated activities. Implementing this alliance tested every skill I possessed. We needed to create a large-scale heating solution that could warm a space 20 times larger than my workshop. The mall had no existing fireplaces or chimney systems. requiring us to engineer ventilation from scratch. And all of this while temperatures outside regularly hit -40, making exterior work possible only in short rotations. I adapted a design I'd seen years earlier at a railroad maintenance facility, essentially creating a central furnace with distributed heat channels running through the food court. We scavenged metal ductwork from the mall's HVAC system, automotive parts from abandoned vehicles in the parking lot, and additional coal from a landscaping supply warehouse that still had pallets of heating charcoal. The project consumed 2 weeks of relentless effort. During that time, the alliance remained fragile. Not everyone in either group supported the cooperation. Some of my people feared weakening our position by sharing knowledge and resources. Some of their people remembered the violence of the failed raid and nursed resentment. What solidified the partnership wasn't the completion of the heating system, though that helped. It was the night the soldier returned. He appeared at our perimeter just after dusk, stumbling through knee-deep snow, his military uniform barely recognizable beneath layers of scavenged clothing. He was alone, severely frostbitten, and nearly delirious. Sarah worked through the night stabilizing him. By morning, we learned his story. Private Eli Ramos had been part of Lieutenant Chen's unit. Their convoy had continued welfare checks for another day after visiting us, then received orders to return to their forward operating base near Columbus. They never made it. Black ice on a bridge sent their lead vehicle into a ravine. The remaining vehicles were ambushed by a large, well-armed civilian group desperate for their supplies and equipment. Only 3 soldiers escaped the initial attack. Private Ramos was the only one to survive the subsequent trek through the wilderness. His account shattered any remaining illusions about government rescue. The military was retreating not just from the cold but from the collapse of civil order. Outposts were being abandoned. Supply lines had failed. Commands were contradictory or simply absent as communication networks degraded. The strategic withdrawal had become every unit for itself. More disturbing were his descriptions of what lay between us and the supposed safe zones in the south. Highways turned to kill zones where the weak were preyed upon by the desperate. Checkpoints established not by authorities but by heavily armed civilians charging tolls for passage. Former military units gone rogue, using their training and equipment to dominate territories. The exodus south had created a gauntlet few were surviving. The lieutenant kept looking at my forge setup. Now, I understand why. She knew they weren't coming back. She was memorizing how I'd arranged things, how the heat was being generated and distributed. Knowledge that would keep her alive when her unit inevitably fragmented. Private Ramos' arrival transformed our thinking. The Mall Alliance shifted from temporary cooperation to long-term community building. If no help was coming, if movement south was potentially more dangerous than remaining in place, then we needed to create sustainable systems right where we were. Rebecca Hayes and I established a joint council with representatives from both groups. We began planning beyond immediate survival toward a future none of us had imagined 3 weeks earlier. The mall became our central gathering point, its food court now warm enough to host community meals. Our workshop remained our industrial center, producing the tools our new society required. We scavenged systematically, mapping resources within a 5-mile radius, then 10. Darius Washington trained hunting parties from both groups, focusing on the few hardy animals still active in the extreme cold. We learned that some wildlife was actually thriving in the changed conditions. Arctic hares had moved south ahead of the temperature shift, multiplying rapidly without their traditional predators. They became a staple of our diet. The expanded community brought new skills. Among the mall group was a former biology teacher who helped us start indoor growing operations using seeds from a garden center and growing techniques adapted from marijuana cultivation. A retired electrician who knew how to maintain generators and create wind-up power sources for essential electronics. A veterinarian whose knowledge of animal physiology saved human lives when conventional treatments failed. Not everything went smoothly. Interpersonal conflicts flared as people processed trauma differently. Resource allocation remained contentious despite our best efforts at fairness. The cold wore down everyone's emotional reserves, making minor disagreements escalate rapidly. We established a justice council to mediate disputes, creating rules and consequences that reflected our new reality. The houses closest to the train yard had been picked clean in a way that seemed methodical. This wasn't random scavenging but deliberate, professional salvage operations. Rail equipment had been removed with proper tools, not hastily ripped out. Maintenance logs were missing from the office. Someone with railroad knowledge had been there, someone who knew what to take and why. I mentioned this observation at the next council meeting. Most dismissed it as irrelevant to our immediate concerns. Rebecca suggested that railroad employees had simply taken their tools home when operations ceased. But something about the precision of the scavenging bothered me. It felt like preparation, not desperation. That night, Martin Jeffries came back from his watch with news that would change everything. He'd seen lights in the train yard, and they were moving with purpose. I took Martin's report about lights in the train yard seriously. 3 of us went to investigate before dawn: myself, Darius with his hunting rifle, and Rebecca, who insisted on representing the mall group. We moved silently through the snow, keeping to shadows, communicating with hand signals I'd learned from Private Ramos. The temperature that morning was -35, but without wind, making stealth movement possible if you were properly layered. The Pittsburgh Eastern Rail Yard had been my second home for years. I knew every switch house, maintenance shed, and office building. Even buried under snow and transformed by ice, I navigated by memory. We approached from the south, using a drainage culvert that ran beneath the perimeter fence. The lights Martin had seen were concentrated around the main maintenance facility, a large metal building where locomotives underwent repairs. As we drew closer, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The snow around the building had been methodically cleared. Not just pathways, but defensive positions. Someone had created sight lines and firing angles. This wasn't random scavenging. This was occupation. We retreated to a storage shed about 100 yards away to observe. Through Darius's hunting scope, we counted 7 individuals moving purposefully around the maintenance facility. They wore mismatched cold-weathered gear, but moved with coordinated precision. At least 3 carried military-style rifles. They had established a perimeter, posted guards, and were clearly working on something inside the main building. "Ex-military?" Rebecca whispered. "Maybe," I replied. "But they're focused on the machinery. Look at how they're bringing parts inside, not taking them out." That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't scavenging. They were repairing. The main generator for the rail yard was housed in that building, a massive diesel unit that powered the entire complex during outages. If they could get it running, they'd have industrial-level electricity, a game-changing resource in our frozen world. We watched for another hour as daylight strengthened, then retreated before we could be spotted. Back at our compound, we convened an emergency council meeting. The implications were significant. Another organized group, well-armed and technically skilled, operating less than a mile from us. They hadn't made contact despite surely knowing of our existence from our forged smoke. That suggested either cautious isolation or hostile intent. Private Ramos, still recovering but lucid, offered his assessment. They're establishing a forward operating base. Military doctrine for hostile territory. Secure power, establish defensible perimeter, control access points. We should assume they're dangerous until proven otherwise. The council was divided on how to respond. Some advocated immediate contact, potentially negotiating another alliance like we'd done with the mall group. Others favored increased security and watchful waiting. A few pushed for preemptive action, arguing their resources were too scarce to risk competition. I proposed a middle path. We would increase security but also send a small scouting team to gather more information before making decisions. If they were indeed restoring power to the rail yard, that represented both opportunity and threat. Electricity would transform survival possibilities, but only for those who controlled it. Our resource challenges had grown as our community expanded. The food court heating system consumed fuel at alarming rates. Our coal supply, which I'd initially calculated would last 3 months, would be depleted in weeks at current usage. We've been experimenting with alternatives, compressed paper products, certain plastics, wood charcoal, but nothing produced the consistent high heat that coal provided for the forge. Hunting parties had to venture farther each trip, as local game was harvested or driven away by our presence. Darius reported signs of other hunters in areas we'd previously had to ourselves. The medication supply for Sarah's infirmary was critically low, especially antibiotics and pain management drugs. We'd scavenged all nearby pharmacies and medical offices. The water situation was stable but labor-intensive. Mike Chen's system for collecting and melting snow worked effectively, but required constant maintenance as pipes froze and thawed. We calculated that each person needed to contribute 2 hours daily, just to maintain basic water access. These resource pressures created tension within our expanded community. The original workshop group had established bonds through the intense early days. The mall group had their own history and leadership structure. Integration was ongoing but uneven. with subgroups forming along pre-existing relationships. The council structure helped, but suspicion and territoriality simmered beneath the surface. I found myself increasingly in a mediator role, which pulled me away from the technical work I preferred. People trusted me because the forge was our lifeline, and I controlled the forge. I hadn't sought leadership, but it accumulated around me anyway. Every dispute eventually found its way to my workbench. The forge master had spoken, became a half-joking acknowledgement of my reluctant authority. I didn't like it. Railroad work had taught me that leaders make bigger mistakes than followers, and in our situation, mistakes could be fatal. The day after discovering the rail yard occupiers, I took a small team to scout a potential new fuel source. A coal distribution center 10 miles north might still have reserves. The distance made it risky, but our need was becoming desperate. We prepared the most reliable vehicle, a modified pickup with chains on all tires and extra insulation around the engine block. Mike Chen drove with Darius, Martin, and myself as search team. We packed emergency supplies for 3 days, though we planned to return before nightfall. The temperature that morning was minus 28, considered almost mild compared to recent lows. The sky was clear, visibility excellent, conditions as favorable as we could hope for. The journey started smoothly enough. The main roads had been traveled sufficiently that packed snow provided reasonable traction. We passed dozens of abandoned vehicles, some with dark shapes still visible inside. We didn't stop to check. There was nothing we could do for them now, and disturbing the dead invited psychological harm we couldn't afford. About 7 miles out, we encountered our first major obstacle. A tractor-trailer had jackknifed across the highway, creating a barricade of steel and ice. We could see that others had forged a path around it through a drainage ditch, now frozen solid. Mike navigated the detour carefully, the truck tilting at alarming angles before regaining level ground beyond the obstruction. The coal distribution center appeared deserted when we arrived, a good sign potentially. Snow had drifted against the chain-link fence, creating a ramp we easily crossed. The main building was locked, but a loading dock door had been forced open previously. We entered cautiously, weapons ready, calling out to announce our presence in case other scavengers were inside. The interior was dark and bitterly cold, our flashlight beams creating pools of light in the gloom. Office spaces had been thoroughly ransacked, filing cabinets emptied, electronics taken. But we hadn't come for paperwork. We headed for the main warehouse floor. What we found there was both encouraging and troubling. Pallets of coal remained, perhaps 30 tons total, enough to power our forge and heating systems for months. But organized sections had been removed recently, the floors showing signs of equipment tracks in the dust. Someone else was harvesting this resource. We worked quickly, loading as much as our truck could safely carry. About 2 tons, we estimated. Enough for a couple of weeks at current consumption rates. We need to make multiple trips to secure a significant supply, assuming it remained available. As we worked, Darius kept watch, rotating positions to maintain awareness in all directions. It was during our final loading that he spotted the approaching vehicles. 2 dark shapes moving slowly along the access road, headlights off despite the fading afternoon light. Their cautious approach suggested they weren't friendly visitors. We hastily finished securing our load and retreated to the building's southern exit, away from the approaching vehicles. We made it to our truck unseen and took a secondary road back, avoiding the main route we'd arrived on. The detour added miles to our journey, and darkness was falling rapidly as we approached the halfway point home. In these temperatures, night travel multiplied the dangers exponentially. Mike pushed the vehicle as fast as safety allowed, but the headlights illuminated a disturbing scene ahead. The road was blocked, not by accident but by design. Someone had pushed several cars together, creating an impassable barrier, and movement was visible behind the makeshift barricade. Ambush, Darius said flatly, raising his rifle. Mike cut the lights and engine immediately, letting momentum carry us to a stop at a safe distance. We waited in the growing darkness, weighing options. There was no way around. Steep embankments lined both sides of the road. Reversing would take us back toward the other vehicles we'd spotted. Forward meant confrontation. They know we have supplies, Martin whispered. They've been watching the coal yard. I made the decision. We abandoned the truck and coal. Move on foot through the woods parallel to the road. We can circle back to the compound from the east. No one argued. Survival trumped resources. We grabbed our emergency packs and slipped out of the vehicle, using its bulk as cover while we moved toward the tree line. The snow was deep among the trees, slowing our progress, but we maintained a steady pace parallel to the road, staying just within visual range to keep our bearings. We'd covered perhaps half a mile when the sound of engines starting reached us. Lights appeared on the road as our abandoned truck was discovered. Voices carried in the cold air, angry shouts followed by the mechanical screech of the truck being turned around. "They'll follow our tracks," Darius warned. He was right. Our trail through the deep snow would be obvious to even amateur trackers. We needed to obscure our path or create a false trail. Martin suggested using a frozen stream bed that crossed our route a quarter-mile ahead. Moving in the water would leave minimal traces. The stream was solid ice, its surface slick but passable if we moved carefully. We followed its winding course for nearly 2 miles, the temperature dropping steadily as full darkness enveloped us. My fingers and toes were losing sensation despite multiple layers of protection. We needed shelter soon or risked serious frostbite. Mike recognized our location first. We'd circled farther east than intended but were now only about 3 miles from the edge of town. The suburban neighborhoods there would provide potential shelter for the night. We couldn't risk continuing to the compound in darkness, potentially leading hostiles directly to our people. The first houses we reached had already been picked clean, but we found one with a basement access that hadn't been forced. Inside was cold but significantly warmer than outside, perhaps 15 degrees above the external temperature. We sealed the entrance and used our emergency supplies to create a minimal camp. Chemical heat packs, emergency blankets, small amounts of high-calorie rations. No one slept much that night. We took watches in pairs, monitoring for pursuit while the others tried to rest. The temperature inside the basement dropped steadily as the night progressed, eventually reaching just above zero. We huddled together for warmth, conversation minimal, focus on surviving until dawn. First light brought new challenges. The temperature outside had plunged to -45 overnight. Exposed skin would freeze in minutes at that temperature. Our water had frozen solid despite being kept close to our bodies. The batteries in our communication equipment were failing in the extreme cold. We layered every piece of clothing we had and prepared to move. Our plan was simple: make our way toward the mall, approach from the north to avoid leading any pursuers directly to our community, and alert our people to the new threat. The coal would have to wait. Security had become our primary concern. The journey was brutal. Moving through hip-deep snow drifts, fighting the kind of cold that makes breathing painful, constantly scanning for threats. We reached the mall's perimeter shortly after noon, approaching the loading dock entrance that served as the rear access point. The guards recognized us immediately but followed security protocols anyway, keeping weapons trained until verification was complete. Once inside, the relative warmth of the mall hit like a physical force. My face burned as circulation returned. We were quickly surrounded by concerned community members as word of our early return without the truck spread. Rebecca and the Joint Council convened immediately upon our arrival. We reported everything: the coal supply, the ambush, the coordinated tactics of our mysterious opponents. Connected to our earlier discovery at the rail yard, a disturbing picture emerged. At least 2 organized groups were operating in our vicinity, possibly coordinating with each other, and they controlled significant resources. Private Ramos listened intently to our description of the vehicles and tactics. "Sounds like standard resource denial operations," he said. "Military doctrine: if you can't secure a supply, ensure your enemy can't either. These aren't random survivors. This is organized competition." The immediate impact on our community was severe. Without the coal we hoped to retrieve, our fuel situation became critical. I calculated that at current usage rates, we had perhaps 10 days before the forge would go cold. The mall's heating system might last slightly longer if we reduced the heated area to essential spaces only. More concerning was the strategic situation. We were now aware of at least 2 hostile groups in our area, but they were also aware of us. Our community of 86 people, 43 from my original workshop group and 43 from the mall, was potentially outnumbered and certainly outgunned based on what we observed. The council debated through the afternoon and into evening. Some advocated immediate relocation, abandoning our established base for somewhere less known. Others argued for aggressive expansion of our security perimeter and active patrols. A few suggested attempting diplomatic contact, seeking accommodation rather than conflict. I found myself pushing for a different approach. "We can't match them for weapons or military training," I told the council. "But we have something they may need: technical knowledge and manufacturing capability. The forge isn't just a heat source. It's a strategic resource that can produce tools they can't get anywhere else. Rebecca nodded slowly. Trade instead of confrontation. Exactly. But from a position of strength. We need to know more about them first. Their numbers, their real capabilities and needs. The Council authorized a dedicated reconnaissance operation. Darius would lead a small team to gather intelligence on both the rail yard occupiers and the group that had ambushed us. Meanwhile, we would accelerate production of defensive tools and weapons for our community while reducing fuel consumption wherever possible. I spent that night working at the forge, pushing myself despite exhaustion. We needed to create more efficient heating systems that required less fuel. I had ideas based on Russian sauna designs I'd studied years earlier, masonry stoves that captured and radiated heat long after the fire had died. If we could build several of these throughout our community spaces, we could reduce forge usage significantly. As I worked, I noticed something odd about the latest batch of coal we'd been using. Mixed among the standard bituminous pieces were chunks with a different density and burning characteristic. I separated these and tested them independently. They produced nearly twice the heat output per weight. This wasn't normal coal, it was anthracite, a higher-grade material typically used for specialized industrial applications. I consulted our inventory records. This batch had come from a rail car we'd scavenged 2 weeks earlier, shortly before discovering the rail yard occupiers. The connection clicked into place. The methodical scavenging I'd observed, the rail yard activation, the ambush at the coal distribution center, all pointed to a group with specific knowledge of railroad resources and systems. They had weapons I recognized from the brief glimpse during our escape from the ambush, military grade, not civilian hunting rifles or police equipment. Combined with their tactics and organization, the picture became clearer. These weren't random survivors or even local military units gone rogue. This was a specialized group with a specific mission. The next morning, Darius's reconnaissance team returned earlier than expected. Their report confirmed my suspicions and added disturbing new details. The rail yard group had indeed restored power to the maintenance facility. They were working on locomotives, specifically the diesel-electric models used for long-haul freight, and they were wearing patches with insignia the Private Ramos recognized immediately. Special Transportation Division, a military unit tasked with maintaining critical infrastructure during national emergencies. They're not scavenging, Private Ramos explained to the Council. They're activating, following contingency plans established for exactly this scenario. Restoring transportation networks to connect strategic assets. Why haven't they contacted us? Rebecca asked. If they're official military, wouldn't they be gathering survivors? Private Ramos shook his head grimly. STD operates under different protocols than standard military units. Their primary mission is infrastructure, not civilian support. In fact, they're trained to treat civilian populations as potential security risks during critical operations. So they see us as a threat, I said, or as a resource to be managed. Either way, they're not here to help us. They're here to establish control of the rail lines for whatever strategic purpose they've been assigned. This revelation transformed our understanding of our situation. We weren't just competing with other survivors for resources. We were potentially interfering with a military operation with national security implications. An operation that clearly had the resources and authorization to remove obstacles, including us. As this realization sank in, Martin rushed into the council room. There's someone at the perimeter, he reported breathlessly. Single individual, unarmed, asking for Apollo by name. The council turned to me, questions in their eyes. I had no answers. They said to tell you they're from Harrisburg Division, Martin continued. Said you'd understand what that means. I did understand. Harrisburg Division was the Eastern Administrative Sector for Amtrak operations, my former employer. Someone from the railroad had found me. But why? They're waiting at the North Gate, Martin finished. Said they have a proposal that will keep us all alive through February. I approached the North Gate with Darius and Private Ramos flanking me, both armed and alert. 4 additional guards positioned themselves on nearby rooftops, providing coverage if this was an ambush. The visitors stood alone on the other side of our makeshift fence, hands visible. No visible weapons. A woman bundled against the cold in what looked like standard railroad winter gear, the kind issued to track maintenance crews for working in extreme conditions. When she lowered her hood, I recognized her immediately. Catherine Saunders, operations manager for the Harrisburg Division. We'd worked together on the Pittsburgh-Philadelphia line for 3 years before my transfer to the Chicago route. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face weathered by cold and stress, but her posture remained military straight, a remnant of her Army Corps of Engineers background before joining the railroad. Apollo Rook, she said, her breath clouding around her face. "Still making things hot, I see." "Catherine," I acknowledged, keeping my distance, "you're a long way from Harrisburg." "Harrisburg doesn't exist anymore. Not functionally. The eastern seaboard is in complete collapse. We've repositioned to operational nodes with sustainable power." I nodded toward the rail yard. "With your friends at the maintenance facility?" Her expression flickered, surprise, quickly controlled. "You'd spotted them already. That's good. Shows you're paying attention. They're not exactly my friends, but we have aligned interests." "Which are?" "Survival first. Restoration second." She glanced at the armed men beside me. "This conversation would be better somewhere warmer. I walked 4 miles in -30 to reach you. My extremities would appreciate some heat." I considered the request. Standard security protocols would argue against bringing an unknown visitor into our sanctuary. But Catherine wasn't exactly unknown to me, and information was a resource we desperately needed. I nodded to Darius, who stepped forward to perform a thorough search for weapons or communications devices. Finding nothing concerning, we escorted her inside. The relative warmth of the mall's food court seemed to physically impact Catherine. She swayed slightly as the temperature change hit her, removing her outer gloves to warm her fingers properly. I watched her take in our setup: the central heating system, the organized seating areas, the clear evidence of a functioning community. "Impressive," she said simply. "Especially the heating solution. Your design?" "Collaborative effort," I replied, not giving details. "You mentioned a proposal." Rebecca and other council members had joined us, forming a loose semicircle around our visitor. Private Ramos stayed closest, his military training making him especially wary of someone connected to active military units. Catherine accepted a cup of hot tea from Sarah Williams but remained standing, addressing the group formally. "I represent what remains of the Northeast Corridor Transportation Authority. After the initial climate collapse, we consolidated with other infrastructure agencies to form a continuity operation focused on preserving critical transportation capabilities." "You're working with the military unit at the rail yard," Private Ramos stated. Flatly, Catherine nodded. "The Special Transportation Division was activated under continuity of government protocols. Their mission is to restore and maintain strategic rail lines for national security purposes." "What national security?" Rebecca asked sharply. "The nation is freezing to death. Parts of it are," Catherine acknowledged, "but the southern regions remain viable, and certain critical facilities must remain connected regardless of climate conditions. Nuclear plants that can't simply be abandoned. Military installations, food production centers." I cut through the generalities. "What's your proposal, Catherine?" She set down her tea and met my eyes directly. "The STD has restored power to the maintenance facility and has 3 locomotives operational. They're preparing to clear and repair the main line south. Their mission is to establish a supply corridor between remaining strategic points." "And what does that have to do with us?" Darius asked. "They need technical personnel. The military can provide security and basic operational capability, but they lack specialized knowledge for complex repair and maintenance work." She turned to me. "They know about your forge, Apollo. They know you've created a sustainable heat source and manufacturing capability. They want that knowledge. More specifically, they'd want you." The room fell silent. I felt the weight of every gaze. "In exchange for what?" I finally asked. "Incorporation of your community into the operation. Protected status. Relocation to a more sustainable location once the rail corridor is established. Food, medicine, fuel." "Assuming we believe these promises," Rebecca said, "what's to prevent them from simply taking what they want? They clearly have superior firepower." Catherine's expression remained neutral. "They'd consider that option. A direct assault would likely succeed but would result in casualties on both sides and potential damage to the very resources and knowledge they need. They prefer cooperation, but make no mistake, if they determine your group represents a threat to their mission objectives, they will act decisively." There it was, the threat beneath the offer. Cooperate or be eliminated. The military efficiency I'd observed in their operations made the threat credible. "How many personnel do they have?" Private Ramos asked. 23 combat-capable personnel plus 7 technical specialists." Catherine answered promptly. Too promptly. She'd been authorized to share that information, which meant either it was accurate or it was what they wanted us to believe. "And their timeline?" I pressed. 3 days to complete repairs on the locomotives. 5 more to clear and repair the critical sections of track. After that, they begin operations southward, with or without your cooperation." She paused. "I should mention that the weather forecast is deteriorating." Models predict another 40-degree temperature drop within the week as a new Arctic air mass descends. Your current heat solutions will be insufficient. I exchanged glances with Rebecca and the other council members. The implication was clear. Even if we survived conflict with the military unit, we might not survive the coming cold snap. We need to discuss this privately, I told Catherine. She nodded. I expected as much. I'm authorized to remain for 6 hours to receive your answer. After that, the STD will proceed with alternative plans. We placed Catherine in a secure room with basic comforts and assembled the full council for emergency deliberation. The debate was heated and divisive. Trust levels for this new military presence ranged from cautious openness to outright rejection. The Hmong group, having already experienced one successful alliance, generally favored exploring cooperation. My original workshop group, more self-sufficient from the beginning, leaned toward independence. Private Ramos provided crucial perspective. The STD operates under special contingency authorities. They're not peacekeepers or disaster relief. Their primary mission will always be the infrastructure, not civilian welfare. But they need Apollo's technical knowledge, Rebecca countered. That gives us leverage. Temporary leverage, Darius pointed out. Once they extract what they need, what incentive do they have to keep promises to civilians who consume resources? The debate continued for hours, cycling through scenarios, weighing risks against necessary survival needs. Our coal supply remained critical. The promised temperature drop would push us beyond our current capabilities. Yet surrendering autonomy to a military unit with unknown ultimate objectives carried its own dangers. In the end, we reached a compromise position. We would offer limited cooperation, sharing technical knowledge and forge capabilities in exchange for immediate fuel supplies and protection. But we would maintain our independent community structure and decision-making authority. Most importantly, we would prepare contingency plans in case the arrangement soured. I conveyed our position to Catherine, who received it with professional neutrality. I'll relay your terms. Expect a response by morning. After she departed, escorted to our perimeter by armed guards, we implemented immediate security enhancements. Additional watches, evacuation preparations, concealment of our most critical supplies. We couldn't match the military unit for firepower, but we could ensure that any conflict would be costly enough to make cooperation remain their more attractive option. That night, I worked late at the forge, pushing our remaining coal supply to create tools we might soon need. Steel spikes that could disable vehicle engines if driven through radiators. Reinforced barricades for defensive positions. Spring-loaded traps that could incapacitate without killing. Important if we faced professionally trained soldiers rather than desperate civilians. Around midnight, Sarah Williams brought me hot tea and sat quietly watching my work. After several minutes of silence, she spoke. You don't trust them. It wasn't a question. I continued hammering the glowing metal as I answered. I trust that they'll act according to their mission parameters. The question is whether those parameters include long-term support for civilians. Catherine is your former colleague. Does that count for anything? I considered the question seriously. Catherine was always mission-focused, even when we worked together. Personal relationships were secondary to operational objectives. That made her an excellent operations manager. It makes her a questionable ally in our current situation. But you'll cooperate anyway. I quenched the metal spike in water, steam rising around us. I'll share knowledge that helps repair the locomotives and clear the tracks. That serves everyone's interests, including ours. A functioning rail line could be our lifeline regardless of who controls it initially. Sarah nodded slowly. You're planning something they haven't considered. I didn't answer directly. Get some rest, Sarah. Tomorrow will be challenging regardless of their response. The STD's answer came before dawn. 3 military Humvees approached our perimeter, stopping at a respectful distance. Catherine emerged from the center vehicle along with a military officer, whose insignia identified him as a major. They requested a meeting at our boundary rather than entry into our compound, a gesture that acknowledged our sovereignty over our space, while demonstrating their own security protocols. Rebecca and I met them with Private Ramos and Darius as advisors. The major introduced himself simply as Hodges, offering no first name. His manner was crisp but not aggressive, a professional soldier executing a mission, rather than a warlord seeking dominance. Ms. Saunders conveyed your position, he stated without preamble. We find most terms acceptable with modifications. The modifications were significant. They would provide immediate fuel supplies from their own reserves, enough to maintain our forge operations at current levels for approximately 2 weeks. They would incorporate willing technical personnel into their operation, with primary focus on individuals with railroad, mechanical, or metalworking experience. They would offer protection within defined perimeters. In exchange, I would need to relocate my primary forge operations to their facility, bringing key equipment and materials. I would train their personnel in critical repair techniques. And most significantly, community members who joined their operation would come under military authority and discipline. This isn't cooperation, Rebecca objected. It's absorption. Major Hodges remained impassive. We're offering survival with purpose. The alternative is maintaining independence until resources fail, then either conflict or capitulation under worse terms. The temperature drop coming will change all existing calculations. The Major wasn't wrong about the practical realities. Without additional fuel sources, our community would face terminal decline within weeks. The promised temperature drop would accelerate that timeline dramatically. But surrendering control of our forge operations would fundamentally alter the power dynamics between our groups. The forge wasn't just a heat source. It was our primary manufacturing capability and the heart of our community identity. I proposed a counteroffer. I'll establish a secondary forge operation at your facility, train your personnel, and support critical repairs. But the primary forge remains here, under our control, maintaining our community's independence. The Major considered this, then nodded slightly. Acceptable with conditions. We established a joint security perimeter, shared resource allocation protocols, and immediate focus on the locomotive repairs. The negotiation continued for another hour, establishing boundaries, authorities, and expectations. By its conclusion, we had forged an uneasy alliance, not the absorption they initially sought, but certainly not the independence we'd maintained until now. Implementation began immediately. The STD provided 10 barrels of high-grade coal from their reserves, transported directly to our forge. In return, I selected key equipment for the secondary forge operation at the rail yard and identified 3 community members with relevant technical skills to assist me. The rest of the day passed in controlled chaos as we established the practical foundations of our new arrangement. Joint security patrols began, combining our people's local knowledge with their tactical training. Resource inventories were exchanged, revealing both strengths and vulnerabilities on both sides. The STD had superior weapons, communications equipment, and military supplies. We had better food production, medical capabilities, and manufacturing tools. By evening, I was working side by side with their chief engineer, assessing the locomotive repairs needed to make the engines fully operational. They had achieved basic functionality, but lacked the specialized knowledge for optimal performance. The engineer, a competent but narrowly trained technician, had managed essential repairs but missed critical efficiencies that I recognized immediately from my years on the railroad. The dynamic braking system is misaligned, I explained, pointing to connections that looked correct to the untrained eye, but would fail under full operational stress. And your fuel injection timing is off by nearly 8 degrees. The engineer accepted the assessment without ego, immediately adjusting his approach. That's why the Major wanted you specifically. He said your personnel file indicated hybrid expertise in both operations and mechanical systems. The casual reference to my personnel file confirmed something I'd suspected. This wasn't a random military unit that happened to discover us. They had targeted this location with specific knowledge of who might be in the area. Catherine's appearance wasn't coincidence. It was calculated outreach based on existing intelligence. As we worked, I carefully observed the STD's operations. Their security was professional but not obsessive. They maintained clear lines of communication, regular patrol rotations, and disciplined resource usage. There was no evidence of the predatory behavior we'd seen from some survivor groups. No hoarding, no arbitrary authority, no abuse of power for personal gain. They'd function like the military unit they claimed to be, mission-focused and practical. But I also noted concerning patterns. Civilian concerns were consistently subordinated to operational priorities. Resource allocations favored mission requirements over human comfort. Decision-making was hierarchical with minimal consultation. All characteristics that might be justified during an acute emergency, but would become problematic in a long-term community arrangement. Most telling was their attitude toward the future. Every conversation focused on immediate mission objectives, repairing locomotives, clearing tracks, establishing the supply corridor. There was little discussion of what came after, of rebuilding civil society or sustainable community governance. Their horizon extended only as far as their orders. I returned to our compound that evening with mixed impressions. The alliance offered genuine survival advantages, but at potential long-term costs to our autonomy and community vision. As I reported to our council, opinions remained divided on whether we'd made the right choice. "We're gaining time," Rebecca summarized pragmatically. "Time to prepare alternatives if this arrangement fails." Private Ramos was less optimistic. "Military priorities shift based on command decisions we won't be part of. Today, you're a valuable technical resource. Tomorrow, you might be an unnecessary consumer of limited supplies." I spent that night examining maps of the rail system, focusing on sections not included in the STD's operational planning. Their focus was the main line south, the most direct route to warmer regions and strategic facilities. But the rail network included numerous secondary lines, maintenance tracks, and abandoned spurs that didn't appear in their planning documents. One location in particular caught my interest: an old maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the Monongahela River southeast of our position. Originally built to service underwater cable conduits, it had been repurposed during a rail expansion project I'd worked on 7 years earlier. The tunnel didn't appear on standard maps, its access points disguised as ordinary maintenance sheds on either bank. The tunnel's existence represented an option the STD wasn't accounting for: a potential evacuation route if our alliance collapsed, or a supply line they didn't control if resources became contested. I marked its location on my personal maps but shared this information only with Rebecca and Darius, our most trusted council members. 3 days into our alliance, the promised weather shift arrived. Arctic air descended like a hammer, dropping temperatures from -30 to -50 within hours. Wind chill pushed the effective temperature to -70 in exposed areas. Even with our enhanced fuel supplies, maintaining survivable temperatures became a constant battle. The ST's facility, with its industrial-grade generators and internal heating systems, managed better than our compound. Major Hodges extended an offer to relocate our most vulnerable community members to their facility: pregnant women, young children, the elderly, and infirm. Some accepted, creating the first significant population transfer between our groups. I continued dividing my time between our primary forge and the secondary operation at the rail yard. The locomotive repairs progressed ahead of schedule, my railroad experience accelerating their timeline considerably. Major Hodges noted this progress with approval, but remained guarded about the next phases of their mission. I was granted access to repair facilities, but excluded from planning meetings and communications with their higher command, if such communications even existed. On the 4th day of our alliance, I noticed something that reversed my understanding of our situation. While working beneath one of the locomotives, I spotted a marking on an ammunition crate that had been partially concealed beneath equipment. The crate bore the insignia of the 10th Mountain Division, a light infantry unit specialized in cold weather operations, not the Special Transportation Division as claimed. When I emerged from beneath the engine, I casually repositioned my tools to get a better look at other equipment cases. Most bore the STD markings I expected, but several had been modified, the original unit designations visible beneath hasty repainting. This wasn't a purpose-activated STD unit, following continuity of government protocols. This was something else, possibly a composite unit formed from multiple military fragments, operating under adopted authority rather than official orders. The revelation didn't necessarily make them more dangerous, but it significantly altered the calculus of trusting their intentions and promises. I finished my work without revealing my discovery, returning to our compound with new urgency. I gathered Rebecca, Darius, and Private Ramos in our most secure location, sharing what I'd observed. Private Ramos processed the information with growing alarm. If they're not actually STD, their mission parameters could be locally determined rather than strategic national priorities. That makes their endgame much less predictable. Could they simply be using available equipment? Rebecca asked. Military units scavenging from each other as commands fragmented? Possible, Ramos acknowledged. But combined with their information specificity about Apollo and their clear targeting of this location, it suggests something more deliberate. I laid out the maintenance tunnel maps on the table between us. We need a contingency that doesn't rely on their goodwill or mission alignment. The tunnel provides an exit they don't know about. We spent hours developing a fallback plan, essential supply catches, evacuation protocols, communication methods for separated group members. The work was interrupted when Martin Jeffries burst into the room, breathless from running. 3 new vehicles at the rail yard, he reported. Military transport trucks. They're unloading equipment, lots of it, and Catherine is arguing with Major Hodges. Loudly, I left immediately for the rail yard, using the pretext of checking on forge operations there. Darius insisted on accompanying me, keeping a respectful distance but remaining within visual contact. The temperature had dropped to -58, making the quarter-mile journey between our compound and the rail yard physically punishing despite multiple protective layers. Each breath crystallized instantly, my eyelashes frosting over within minutes. The rail yard security had been enhanced since my last visit. Additional checkpoints, more armed personnel visible on patrol. The new transport trucks Martin had reported were positioned near the main building, their cargo mostly offloaded already. I noted the equipment being moved inside, not just repair tools or survival gear, but heavy weapons components I recognized from my military railway operations training. Mounted gun systems designed for train defense, communications arrays, armored plating. They were preparing for conflict, not just transportation. My arrival coincided with the conclusion of whatever disagreement had been occurring between Catherine and Major Hodges. They separated as I approached, Catherine's face flushed with anger or cold, perhaps both. Hodges nodded curtly to her before striding toward the command center they'd established in the former yard office. Apollo, Catherine acknowledged, her tone carefully neutral despite the emotional residues still visible in her expression. Your timing is interesting. Scheduled maintenance check, I replied, gesturing toward the secondary forge we'd established. Everything okay? She glanced toward where Hodges had disappeared, then took my arm and guided me toward the locomotive we'd been repairing, away from the most obvious listening positions. There's been a change in operational parameters, she said quietly. The timeline has accelerated. The weather? Partly. But there's more. Command has authorized Operation Rolling Thunder. The phrase meant nothing to me, but her tone conveyed significance. What does that mean for our arrangement? She hesitated, weighing something internally. How much do you know about national continuity protocols, Apollo? Not much beyond what's publicly available. There are fallback positions, hardened facilities designed to maintain government functions during catastrophic disruptions. Several are accessible only by rail, intentionally isolated from road networks to enhance security. I began to understand. And the STD's mission is to connect to these facilities. She nodded. Originally, yes, but communication with Central Command has been degraded for weeks. Regional commanders are making independent assessments and decisions based on incomplete information, like Major Hodges. Catherine's expression tightened. Hodges is implementing Rolling Thunder based on fragments of information and his own interpretation of mission priorities. I disagree with his assessment. What does Rolling Thunder involve? I pressed. She lowered her voice further. Resource consolidation. Eliminating competing claims on strategic supplies. Establishing clear control hierarchies in the operational zone. The euphemisms couldn't disguise the meaning. They were planning to absorb or eliminate other survivor groups, including ours, eventually. The locomotives and rail line weren't just for reaching southern safe zones. They were for projecting force and control throughout the region. How soon? I asked. 24 hours until locomotion capability is complete. 48 until the main line south is cleared. After that, regional operations begin in earnest. She met my eyes directly. Your technical value provides temporary protection, Apollo. But once the locomotives are fully operational, that leverage diminishes significantly. I process this information rapidly, maintaining a neutral expression while recalculating every aspect of our situation. Thank you for the clarity, Catherine. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I recommended continued alliance with your community on practical grounds. Skilled civilians under cooperative arrangements are more valuable than controlled subjects or eliminated threats. Hodges sees it differently. Military efficiency, I observed. Military short-sightedness, she corrected. This isn't a conventional battlefield with clear objectives. Rebuilding requires more than securing territory. I continued my inspection of the forge and locomotive repairs, maintaining the appearance of routine work while gathering as much intelligence as possible about the STD's enhanced preparations. The 3 transport trucks had brought not only additional weapons, but at least 15 new personnel, expanding their operational capacity significantly. Their security patrols had become more frequent and systematic, covering approaches to the rail yard that had previously been only occasionally monitored. Most concerning was the positioning of their new weapon systems. They weren't arranged for defense against external threats, but positioned to control key terrain features between the rail yard and our compound. They were establishing fire control over approaches to our position, while making it appear part of general security enhancements. I completed necessary maintenance on the secondary forge and made adjustments to the locomotive systems that would require several hours to implement, buying time while appearing cooperative. Throughout, I maintained casual conversation with the STD personnel I've been working alongside, gauging their awareness of the operational shift Catherine had described. Most seemed focused on immediate tasks rather than strategic changes, but I noticed increased activity around their communications center and more frequent security briefings for patrol teams. The operational tempo had undeniably accelerated, creating a sense of urgency that hadn't existed days earlier. Upon returning to our compound, I convened an emergency council meeting, securing our discussion space against possible surveillance. The STD had provided us with upgraded communications equipment days earlier, which we now assumed could function as monitoring devices. We conducted truly sensitive conversations in a shielded basement room, using mechanical noise generators to mask our discussions. I relayed Catherine's warning and my observations to the assembled council members. Private Ramos confirmed my interpretation of the weapon's positioning. Classical encirclement preparation, he stated. They're establishing control of approaches while maintaining plausible deniability. Could Catherine be manipulating you? Rebecca asked, creating division between us and Hodges for her own purposes. Possible, I acknowledged, but her assessment aligns with observable evidence, and her background in the Army Corps of Engineers gives her different priorities than Hodges. She values infrastructure and technical capability over pure military control. The council debated our options for nearly 2 hours. Direct confrontation was suicidal given their superior weaponry and training. Continued cooperation might delay conflict but wouldn't prevent eventual absorption or elimination under Operation Rolling Thunder. Abandoning our compound meant sacrificing the infrastructure we'd built, particularly the primary forge that remained our greatest survival asset. In the end, we settled on a multi-layered response. Outwardly, we would maintain cooperation while accelerating our contingency preparations. I would continue working on the locomotives, apparently committed to the alliance while subtly introducing modifications that would give us leverage later. Meanwhile, we would systematically relocate our most vulnerable community members and critical supplies to fallback positions, using the maintenance tunnel as our primary evacuation route. Implementation began immediately. Essential medical supplies, food reserves, and technical documentation were packaged for transport through the tunnel. Children, elderly, and those with limited mobility were prepared for potential rapid evacuation, given specific instructions and assembly points. Our remaining fuel was distributed between multiple locations rather than centralized at the forge. I returned to the rail yard the following morning, bringing additional tools and materials as requested for the locomotive repairs. The operational tempo had increased further overnight. Track clearing teams were preparing heavy equipment. Communications specialists were establishing relay points along the planned route south, and security teams were conducting expanded perimeter drills. Major Hodges himself inspected my work that day, showing particular interest in the dynamic braking systems I was modifying. His technical knowledge was limited, but his attention to security details was comprehensive. He questioned me about specific repair techniques, the time required for completion, and the operational capabilities of the locomotives once restored. We're accelerating our timetable, he informed me directly. I'll need these engines fully operational within 18 hours. The compressed schedule was challenging, but not impossible. I nodded acknowledgement. I'll need additional assistance to meet that deadline. Whatever you require, he agreed readily. This is now our highest priority. Throughout the day, I worked steadily on the locomotives while observing the STD's preparations. Their focus had shifted noticeably from defense to projection capabilities, mounting weapons on vehicles, preparing mobile command equipment, organizing squad-level operational teams. The pattern matched Catherine's warning about regional control operations rather than simple evacuation or relief efforts. Catherine herself was conspicuously absent. When I casually inquired about her whereabouts, I received vague responses about administrative duties or forward planning. By midday, I began to suspect she might have been isolated or restricted due to her disagreement with Hodges about operational priorities. My suspicion was confirmed late in the afternoon when I glimpsed her through a window of the upper administrative offices, apparently engaged in heated discussion with 2 STD security personnel. Her body language suggested constraint rather than cooperation. Whatever influence she had within the operation had evidently diminished as Rolling Thunder accelerated. I completed my assigned locomotive work slightly ahead of schedule, implementing the modifications I'd planned while maintaining the appearance of standard repairs. The engines would function as expected during initial testing, but I'd introduced subtle alterations to the fuel delivery and electrical systems that would give us remote control options if needed later. Impressive work, Major Hodges commended during his final inspection. These look combat-ready. The choice of words was telling. These weren't evacuation vehicles or supply transports in his mind. They were strategic assets for projecting force. Standard railroad maintenance, I replied modestly. They'll run reliably now. Hodges nodded, then shifted to a topic he hadn't previously addressed directly. Your community has valuable skills and resources. We'll be expanding our operational footprint starting tomorrow. I want to incorporate your people more formally into our command structure. The phrasing was diplomatic, but the intention clear. This was the beginning of the absorption Catherine had warned about. Our council would need to discuss any structural changes to our arrangement. I responded carefully. Of course, he agreed smoothly. I'll attend your council meeting this evening to present the benefits of deeper integration. 7 o'clock acceptable. The request was really a directive. Refusing would signal resistance prematurely. I nodded agreement while mentally calculating how this affected our evacuation timeline. We look forward to hearing your proposals, I said. The return to our compound was tense. SD patrols had increased along the route, their positioning more obviously controlling than protective. Darius, who again accompanied me, noted 3 new observation posts established since morning, all oriented toward monitoring movement between our locations rather than external threats. Rebecca convened the council immediately upon my return. Our security team reported similar observations about enhanced STD presence around our perimeter. They weren't overtly hostile, but their positioning had shifted from collaborative security to containment preparation. Hodges is coming here at 7 o'clock, I informed the council, to discuss deeper integration of our communities. Based on Catherine's warning and everything we've observed, this represents the beginning of our absorption or elimination. Private Ramos nodded grimly. Standard procedure. Offer incorporation on increasingly restrictive terms until resistance provides justification for forceful action. How long do we have? Rebecca asked. Hours, not days, I assessed. Once Hodges makes his proposal, our response will determine their timeline. Accept, and will be gradually restricted until we're fully under their control. Refuse, and they'll likely move to secure our resources by force within 24 hours. The council voted unanimously to accelerate our evacuation plan. We would appear to consider Hodges' proposal while simultaneously moving our people and critical resources through the maintenance tunnel. The withdrawal would happen in phases, starting immediately with children and essential supplies, proceeding through the night until only a skeleton group remained to maintain appearances during Hodges' visit. I returned to the forge to make final preparations. The heart of our survival had been this coal-fired metalworking station, and it couldn't be easily transported. Instead, I prepared it for controlled destruction if necessary, creating a thermite-based incendiary system that could be triggered remotely. If we couldn't take it with us, we would ensure the STD couldn't simply claim it intact. As evacuation preparations continued quietly throughout our compound, I found myself working alongside Sophie Lewis, the observant 10-year-old who had first spotted the wolves. She was helping pack essential metalworking tools, her small hands carefully wrapping precision instruments in protective cloth. We're not coming back, are we? She asked matter-of-factly, continuing her work without looking up. We might, I replied, not wanting to lie but careful not to increase her anxiety. But we need to be prepared either way. She nodded, wisdom beyond her years in her expression. Dad says you're making sure the soldiers can't just take everything we built. That's right. Good, she said firmly. They didn't build it. They don't get to have it. The simple moral clarity reminded me why our independence mattered. The STD operated from military pragmatism, seeing resources and strategic positions, rather than communities and shared values. Whatever emerged from this frozen apocalypse needed to preserve humanity's collaborative core, not just its survival instincts. By late afternoon, our evacuation was proceeding according to plan. Nearly 40 community members had already moved through the maintenance tunnel to our rallying point 2 miles beyond STD patrol routes. Essential medical supplies, food reserves, and technical documentation had been successfully relocated. The skeleton crew remaining included council members, security personnel, and enough general community members to prevent obvious depopulation. Major Hodges arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, accompanied by 4 security personnel who positioned themselves strategically around our meeting space. His manner was professional, but carried an underlying tension that hadn't been present in earlier interactions. He had moved from cooperation to execution phase in his mind, his body language more commanding, less collaborative. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice," he began formally. "As I mentioned to Mr. Rook, we're expanding our operational parameters based on new intelligence and changing conditions." He proceeded to outline what he called an enhanced integration framework. Under his proposal, our community would be incorporated directly into STD command structure. Technical personnel, specifically those with metalworking, mechanical, medical, and agricultural skills, would be reassigned to STD operational teams. Our community spaces would be reproposed according to mission requirements. Security would be centralized under STD control. In exchange, we would receive enhanced rations, guaranteed heating fuel, and eventual relocation to southern secured territories once the rail corridor was established. The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning transparent: surrender autonomy and skilled personnel in exchange for basic survival needs. Rebecca, as our lead negotiator, responded with diplomatic caution. "Your proposal represents significant changes to our existing arrangement. We'll need to consult with our full community before providing a response." Hodges nodded, his expression neutral but his eyes evaluating. "Of course. However, operational necessities require an accelerated timeline. We'll need your response by tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. "That's very little time for proper consideration," I observed. "Unfortunately, weather conditions and strategic factors don't allow for extended deliberation," Hodges replied. "The next polar front arrives within 36 hours, with predicted temperatures below -60. Our operational window is narrowing." The meeting concluded with surface cordiality, but underlying tension. As Hodges and his security team departed, we monitored their movements using our perimeter observers. They didn't return directly to the rail yard but instead established new security positions at key approaches to our compound. The encirclement was tightening. "They're not waiting for our answer," Private Ramos observed grimly. "They're preparing to secure the compound regardless of our response." We accelerated the final evacuation phase immediately. The remaining children and elderly were moved through the maintenance tunnel along with additional supply caches. Technical equipment from the forge was prioritized for transport. By midnight, our compound population had been reduced from 86 to 29, just enough to maintain the appearance of normal activity until the final withdrawal. I made the last adjustments to the forge's incendiary system, setting the remote trigger and confirming the thermite positioning. The system would effectively destroy the forge's critical components while creating enough confusion to cover our final escape if necessary. Similar systems had been prepared for other key infrastructure we couldn't transport. Around 2 in the morning, our perimeter guards reported increased STD movement. Additional personnel had arrived at their observation posts, and communication traffic had intensified. Equipment was being positioned at key intersections controlling access to our compound. They were preparing for early morning action rather than waiting for our response at the appointed time. "They're moving before dawn," I informed the council. "Probably 4 or 5 in the morning when they assume we'll be at lowest alertness." The council authorized immediate completion of our evacuation plan. The remaining 29 personnel would withdraw through the maintenance tunnel over the next 2 hours, leaving automated systems to maintain minimal heating and lighting patterns that would mask our departure until the STD made their move. As we prepared for the final withdrawal, I found myself alone in the forge one last time. The heart of our survival during these frozen weeks hummed with familiar heat and energy. I ran my hand along tools I'd crafted, equipment I'd modified, the workspace that had kept 86 people alive when thousands around us had perished. Survival isn't just about maintaining bodily functions. It's about preserving what makes survival meaningful: community, cooperation, shared purpose. The SD's approach sacrificed these values for operational efficiency, treating people as assets rather than partners. Whatever emerged from this frozen apocalypse needed to carry forward the best of humanity, not just its most ruthless aspects. I completed the final forge shutdown sequence, leaving only minimal systems running to mask our departure. The last evacuation group assembled at the maintenance tunnel entrance: Rebecca, Darius, Private Ramos, and the remaining security personnel. We moved silently through the freezing darkness, the temperature now hovering around -60 as the next Arctic front began its descent. The maintenance tunnel was barely 5 feet high in places, requiring us to crouch as we navigated its half-mile length beneath the frozen river. The air inside was slightly warmer than outside, but still well below freezing, our breath creating ghostly clouds in the beam of our shielded flashlights. Water that had seeped through cracks had frozen into crystalline formations along the walls and ceiling, transforming the utilitarian passage into something eerily beautiful. We emerged on the far bank just before 4 in the morning, the night sky brilliant with stars in the clear, desperately cold air. From this position, we could observe our compound and the rail yard beyond, tracking the STD's movements as they prepared their operation. Lights moved with purpose around our perimeter, vehicles positioning for coordinated entry at multiple points. At precisely 4:15, they made their move. Vehicles breached our outer barriers simultaneously at 3 points, security teams deploying in tactical formation. They entered buildings methodically, their movements visible through windows and open doorways. Their efficiency confirmed what we had suspected. This had been planned well before Hodge's proposal meeting. They discovered our absence within 20 minutes, their search patterns becoming increasingly urgent as they confirmed building after building empty of personnel. Radio traffic intensified, visible in the increased movement of command personnel between positions. By 4:45, they had initiated wider search patterns, expanding beyond our compound perimeter. "Time to disappear completely," Rebecca said quietly. I nodded, removing the remote trigger device from my pocket. With a final look at the compound that had been our home and lifeline, I activated the incendiary systems. Multiple buildings illuminated from within as the thermite ignited, destroying key equipment and creating the impression of catastrophic system failures rather than deliberate sabotage. The disruption achieved its purpose, focusing STD attention on fire control rather than immediate pursuit. We used the distraction to move our final group away from the observation position, joining the main community gathering at an abandoned rail maintenance facility 3 miles from our former compound. By dawn, our community of 86 had successfully relocated beyond the STD's immediate control zone. We had sacrificed our established infrastructure but preserved our core resources, technical knowledge, and most importantly, our autonomy. The modified locomotives I'd sabotaged would function initially but fail at critical moments if deployed against us. The data I'd gathered on STD capabilities and weaknesses would inform our next moves. Our immediate future remained challenging. The continuing temperature drop would test our reduced heating capabilities. Food supplies would require careful management until new sources could be established. The STD would eventually extend their operational zone, and we would need to make difficult decisions about resistance, evasion, or negotiation from our new position. But we had maintained the essential foundation of real survival, not just biological persistence but human community. The forge that had kept us alive wasn't just a heat source or manufacturing capability. It was a symbol of what humans could achieve through cooperation and shared purpose. In the coming weeks, we established contact with other survivor communities that had resisted or escaped STD control. We shared technical knowledge, resource information, and mutual support networks. Catherine eventually found her way to our new location, having escaped during the confusion of the compound search. Her railroad expertise complemented my own, allowing us to utilize abandoned rail infrastructure in ways the STD hadn't anticipated. What we found in that railway communications office would change everything. Amid outdated equipment and administrative records was a functioning long-range radio system, connected to independent power. Through this system, we established contact with survivor communities across 3 states, creating an information network outside STD control. We learned that similar military-derived groups had emerged in other regions, some more benevolent than others. We learned of communities that had found unique survival approaches, underground settlements utilizing geothermal heat, floating communities on lakes where water provided insulation, repurposed industrial facilities with self-contained energy systems. The temperature eventually stabilized at a new normal, still brutally cold but manageable with proper techniques and equipment. As weeks turned to months, we developed new technologies specifically adapted to our frozen world, insulation systems derived from indigenous designs, food production methods that functioned in indoor environments, transportation approaches that utilize the now permanent ice. This isn't the end of our story, just the first chapter in the new world we're forging together. The Ice Age may continue for generations, But humanity adapts and continues. My forge still burns, now fueled by renewable methods we developed through necessity and innovation. Our community has grown, incorporating new members and skills while maintaining the core values that kept us alive during those critical first weeks. The railroad blacksmith survived, not because of physical strength or combat skills, but because of technical knowledge and community building. In our new world, these remain the true foundations of survival, not domination or resource control, but cooperation and shared purpose. When you find yourself facing impossible conditions, remember that humans have survived ice ages before with nothing but stone tools and animal skins. We have knowledge they couldn't imagine, technologies they couldn't conceive. More importantly, we have each other. No one survives alone. Communities endure where individuals perish. The forge still burns, and so do we.